Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Stories by Peter Hub. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Daniel Carter and Ethan Cole grew up on the same street in a small American town. From the time they could walk, they shared everything. Baseball games in the summer heat, late-night talks about the future, and even dreams of one day building something that would change the world. Their bond wasn't just friendship, it was brotherhood. Daniel was the visionary. Even as a teenager, he talked about clean energy, about finding a way to make the world better. Ethan, sharp-minded and ambitious, had a knack for leadership and convincing others to follow. Together, they felt unstoppable. Through college, their paths remained intertwined. They studied business and engineering, brainstorming projects and entering competitions side by side. Professors often remarked that Daniel had the ideas, while Ethan had the charisma to sell them. It was a partnership built on perfect balance. Or so it seemed. One late night in their shared dorm room, Daniel sketched on a napkin a design for a solar panel system that could drastically reduce energy costs. Ethan stared at it, eyes gleaming. "This could change everything," he whispered. That napkin would later become the seed of their first company. At the time, neither of them could imagine how far they would rise, or how far they would eventually fall.
After graduation, Daniel and Ethan returned to their hometown with determination burning brighter than ever. They pooled their savings, secured a modest loan, and set up shop in a rented warehouse on the edge of the city. The company they founded, SolarWave, was their ticket to changing the world. The early days were brutal. They slept on fold-out cots in the office, survived on takeout and instant noodles, and spent countless nights troubleshooting prototypes that refused to work. Daniel would bury himself in technical schematics, while Ethan polished presentations and courted early investors. Each setback only pushed them harder, reminding them of that napkin sketch from college. Their dream was worth the struggle. Their first breakthrough came when they landed a local government grant aimed at encouraging renewable energy startups. The grant wasn't huge, but it gave them just enough funding to refine their solar panel design and run pilot programs with local businesses. Suddenly, their warehouse lab felt less like a gamble and more like the birthplace of something revolutionary. As SolarWave grew, so did the spotlight. Media outlets ran stories about two best friends disrupting the energy industry. Investors began circling, intrigued by the combination of Daniel's technical genius and Ethan's gift of persuasion. What once seemed impossible now looked unstoppable. Yet beneath the triumphs, subtle cracks were forming. Daniel noticed how Ethan handled investors, always emphasizing his own role while downplaying Daniel's contributions. It was easy to ignore at first, chalked up to marketing spin, but the imbalance gnawed at Daniel in quiet moments. Despite the unease, Daniel pressed forward. For now, the dream they had built together was alive, and nothing seemed capable of tearing it down. Months passed, and SolarWave's growth accelerated beyond even their boldest forecasts. Contracts with municipalities rolled in, promising to transform entire districts into green energy hubs. Daniel should have been overjoyed. His designs were finally changing the world. Yet beneath the surface, unease gnawed at him. Ethan had begun holding private meetings with board members and outside investors. Daniel only learned about these discussions after decisions had already been made. When he raised his concerns, Ethan brushed him off with the same disarming charm he'd always used. "Danny, you've got to trust me. This is just business. You don't need to get bogged down in the politics. Focus on your innovations." The divide between them grew sharper when Ethan proposed expanding into international markets faster than planned. Daniel argued that the technology wasn't yet ready to scale at that pace. They risked cutting corners on safety and reliability. Ethan countered with spreadsheets, forecasts, and a growing impatience that Daniel barely recognized. For the first time, their arguments ended not in compromise, but in silence. Then came the board presentation. Ethan unveiled a restructuring plan that stunned Daniel. A new class of shares designed to give him majority voting control. To the board, Ethan painted it as a move to streamline decision-making during rapid growth. Daniel saw it for what it was, a power grab. His protests were drowned out by Ethan's polished rhetoric and the board's applause. After the meeting, Daniel cornered Ethan in the hallway. "You're cutting me out," he said quietly. Ethan's smile was thin. "I'm protecting the company. Someone has to steer this ship. And you'd rather tinker in the lab. Let me handle the hard calls." It was then Daniel realized something had shifted irreversibly. Their friendship, once unshakable, now teetered on the edge of betrayal. What had begun as a shared dream was slowly being reshaped into Ethan's empire.
As SolarWave expanded, so did the pressures. Investors demanded faster growth, competitors were circling, and every boardroom meeting seemed more like a battlefield than a celebration. Daniel spent his days buried in engineering challenges, refining their solar arrays to make them more efficient, while Ethan navigated the financial side, chasing bigger deals, securing partnerships, and keeping the spotlight firmly on their company. But slowly, Daniel began to notice Ethan's shifting tone. When reporters came, Ethan was the face of SolarWave. Interviews framed him as the visionary, while Daniel's contributions were reduced to a single line: the technical partner. At first, Daniel brushed it off, convincing himself it didn't matter who took the credit as long as their mission succeeded. Things grew more complicated when Ethan began suggesting changes to their shareholder structure. He argued it was just a formality, making their equity distribution more appealing to incoming investors. But Daniel noticed the fine print. Ethan's proposal subtly diluted his shares while consolidating more power into his own hands. It wasn't a huge shift yet, but the implications were clear. Ethan wanted control. When Daniel confronted him, Ethan laughed it off. "Come on, Danny, you hate this finance stuff anyway. I'm just handling it so you can focus on the tech. That's what you're good at." His tone was warm, reassuring, but beneath it Daniel caught something colder. Ambition that wasn't entirely about their shared dream. Still, Daniel let it slide. They were brothers in all but blood, after all. He told himself Ethan would never betray him, not after everything they had built together. But deep down, the first seeds of doubt had been planted. The weeks following the board restructuring felt like walking through fog for Daniel. He tried to bury himself in research, refining the efficiency of SolarWave's panels, pushing for breakthroughs that could outpace competitors. But every time he presented results, Ethan twisted the narrative to claim credit or redirect focus toward the company's image rather than its integrity. Late one evening, Daniel discovered a troubling pattern in the financial reports. Funds earmarked for research and development had been redirected, quietly shifted toward lavish marketing campaigns and undisclosed consulting fees. When he asked the finance department, they nervously muttered that Ethan had signed off on the changes. Their eyes avoided his, as if they feared being overheard. Daniel confronted Ethan in his corner office, overlooking the city skyline. "You're siphoning money away from the technology," Daniel accused. "Do you even care if the panels perform as promised, or are you just selling an illusion?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, calm and unreadable. "Investors care about confidence, not circuitry. They buy into the story, Daniel.
And stories keep this company alive. Numbers, efficiency percentages, that's background noise. Daniel's chest tightened. This isn't what we built. We promised more than profits. We promised change. Ethan's eyes hardened. Promises don't keep the lights on. Power does. The tension between them seeped into the company itself. Employees whispered in the halls, sensing the fracture between its founders. Some quietly aligned themselves with Ethan, drawn by his charisma and certainty. Others remained loyal to Daniel, inspired by his vision, but increasingly fearful of speaking up. One night, Daniel stayed late at the office, scrolling through investor reports. A file, mistakenly left open on Ethan's assistant's desk, caught his attention. Inside were draft proposals for a founder share adjustment that would drastically dilute Daniel's ownership. The pieces clicked together. Ethan wasn't just maneuvering for control. He was setting Daniel up to be pushed out entirely. Daniel stared at the city lights outside the window, his reflection faint in the glass. The company they had dreamed up as boys was slipping through his fingers, transformed into something unrecognizable. Betrayal was no longer a shadow on the horizon. It was here, inevitable, waiting for the moment to strike.
The morning after leaving SolarWave, Daniel sat in a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner of the city. His notebook lay open, its first page filled with scribbles and half-formed sketches of concepts he had never dared to pitch at SolarWave. Ideas too bold, too untested. But now, with nothing left to lose, those ideas felt like the only way forward. He stared out the window, watching people hurry by, each caught up in their own battles. For years, his world had revolved around SolarWave. Now, for the first time since boyhood, Daniel had to ask himself a terrifying but liberating question. What if I started again? Laura slid into the seat across from him. Her hair was tied back, her posture weary, but her eyes were sharp. "I couldn't stay," she said simply, setting down her resignation letter. "SolarWave without you isn't SolarWave. If you're building something new, I want in." Daniel's throat tightened. He had expected solitude, not loyalty. "Laura, it won't be easy. No investors, no lab, no safety net." She smirked. "Since when has easy ever mattered to you?" They began sketching on napkins, trading visions the way they had in late-night sessions years ago, except now there were no filters, no board politics, no Ethan steering the narrative, just possibility. By the end of the week, Daniel had rented a cramped workspace above an auto garage. The hum of engines below mixed with the sound of clattering tools and hurried brainstorming above. The beginnings of a new company, one without polish but brimming with conviction, took root. As he stood in that bare room, wires and prototypes scattered across folding tables, Daniel felt the stirrings of something he thought Ethan had stolen forever: hope. His empire was gone, but a seed had been planted, and in that seed lay the promise of a future Ethan could never control.
The proposal Ethan had drafted became more than a whisper in the boardroom. It was formally introduced 2 weeks later, wrapped in the language of strategic restructuring and future-proofing shareholder value. Daniel sat across from the directors as Ethan presented, his voice smooth, persuasive, dripping with the polish of a man who had rehearsed every syllable. "This adjustment will ensure our flexibility in attracting new investors," Ethan said, highlighting a slide where Daniel's shares were reduced to a fraction of their original value. "It's a move that guarantees longevity in uncertain markets." Daniel clenched his fists under the table. He saw the fear in the director's eyes, fear of market downturns, of losing momentum. Ethan had fed them exactly what they craved: certainty, even if it was hollow. When it was his turn, Daniel spoke from the heart. SolarWave was never meant to be just another company propped up by spin. We built it to change the way the world uses energy. Diluting my role in this isn't about growth, it's about power, and it will cost us our soul. His words echoed in the silent room, but the decision had already been made. One by one, hands rose in favor of Ethan's proposal. The gavel struck, and with it the dream Daniel and Ethan had shared since boyhood was fractured beyond repair. That night, Daniel packed his office. The walls, once lined with prototype sketches and notes scribbled during late-night brainstorming sessions, looked bare, lifeless. Laura from the engineering team stopped by, her eyes brimming with regret. "We believe in you, Daniel. Don't let this be the end." He forced a smile. "It isn't. Not for me." Walking out of the building for the last time, Daniel felt hollow and strangely free. Ethan had taken the company, but he couldn't erase the knowledge, the vision, or the fire that still burned inside him. Betrayal had closed one chapter, but it had also opened the door to something new. As the city buzzed around him, Daniel whispered to himself, more promise than statement, "I'll build something better." The first weeks in the garage office tested Daniel more than he imagined. The space was cramped, cold at night and noisy during the day. But for him and Laura, it was a sanctuary of reinvention. They scavenged second-hand equipment, wrote proposals on Daniel's aging laptop, and stretched every dollar as far as it would go. Laura tapped her pen against a notepad one evening. "We need a name, something that tells people this isn't just another startup." Daniel looked around the cluttered room, at the half-built models powered by nothing more than determination. "Phoenix Innovations," he said quietly, "rising from ashes, because that's exactly what this is." Laura smiled. "Perfect." Word spread quickly through small circles that Daniel had started something new. A few young engineers, frustrated by SolarWave's new corporate politics, reached out. Within a month, Daniel's team had grown from 2 to 6. They worked long nights under buzzing fluorescent lights, united not by paychecks, they had little money to spare, but by belief in the mission. Yet challenges pressed from all sides. Investors were wary of energy startups after years of failures. Prototypes broke, rent payments loomed. There were days Daniel wondered if Ethan was right, that maybe he was destined to remain in Ethan's shadow. But each setback fueled his resolve. He remembered the betrayal, the stolen trust, and the dreams Ethan had buried under greed. Every night he told himself the same thing: "I will not let him define me." By the end of the second month, the team unveiled their first working prototype, a compact, affordable solar array that could power an entire household. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, and it was theirs. Daniel held the prototype in his hands, exhaustion written across his face, but pride blazing in his eyes. "This," he told the team, "is proof. Proof that we can rise, proof that we're more than what they left us with." For the first time since the betrayal, Daniel no longer felt like a man rebuilding ruins. He felt like a founder of something greater than before. With the prototype complete, Daniel and his small team faced a new challenge: proving it to the world. Phoenix Innovations had little money, but what they lacked in resources, they made up for in grit. Laura organized a modest launch event in the corner of a borrowed community hall. Folding chairs, a borrowed projector, and a hastily painted banner were all they had, but the heart of it was the product. That evening, the hall filled with curious faces, local journalists, environmental activists, a few city officials. Daniel's palms were damp as he stepped onto the small stage. He wasn't the type for speeches, but tonight demanded one. This,
he began, pointing to the solar array, isn't just another gadget. It's a chance for families to take control of their energy, to make clean power not just for the wealthy, but for everyone. The lights dimmed. Laura flipped a switch, and the prototype came alive, quietly powering an array of household lamps and appliances. The audience gasped softly as the lights glowed with steady brilliance. In that moment, the room felt charged with more than electricity. It hummed with hope. Reporters scribbled notes. Activists whispered to one another. A councilwoman approached Daniel afterward, her eyes shining. "If you can scale this, you'll change the city," she told him. News spread faster than Daniel expected. Articles praised Phoenix Innovations as a scrappy disruptor. Community groups reached out. Even investors, those who once avoided energy startups like a plague, began to ask cautious questions. But Ethan wasn't blind. Across town in his high-rise office, he read the articles with a clenched jaw. SolarWave had grown fat on subsidies and contracts, but here was Daniel, once discarded, stealing headlines with a garage-born idea. For the first time, Ethan felt a sliver of unease. Meanwhile, Daniel gathered his team the next night, energy buzzing through the cramped garage office. "This is only the beginning," he told them. "We're not just building panels, we're building trust, and that's what no one can take away." The team cheered, exhaustion giving way to adrenaline. The ashes of betrayal were no longer visible. Sparks of momentum had begun to glow.
Momentum was building, but with it came shadows. A week after the modest launch, Daniel noticed unfamiliar faces lingering outside the garage office. Reporters, sure, but also figures with sharper suits and colder eyes. Whispers followed Phoenix Innovations, and not all of them were kind. Laura tapped a newspaper headline onto the wall. "Local startup challenges industry giant." The article praised their innovation, but also questioned whether such a small team could survive the ruthless energy market. "They're baiting us," said Miguel, the team's engineer, frowning. "Every time we gain traction, SolarWave plants doubts in the press. I recognize their PR playbook." Daniel nodded. "Ethan won't sit still. He'll try to starve us before we can run." And Ethan was already moving. In his polished office, he convened a war room of lawyers and strategists. "Phoenix Innovations is fragile," he told them, tossing the article onto the table. "Undercut their suppliers, pressure their landlords, spread doubts with investors. I want them on their knees before the year is out." The room of advisors murmured assent. To Ethan, Daniel's rise wasn't just inconvenient, it was insulting. A reminder of loyalty discarded and an ego threatened. Back in the garage, Daniel gathered his team again. The glow of victory from the launch was fading into tension. "They'll come at us," he admitted, his voice steady. "They'll try everything: money, influence, fear, but what we have is stronger. We have people who believe in us, and we have each other." Laura's eyes met his. "Then we don't just defend, we grow faster. We stay 3 steps ahead." Daniel smiled faintly. The battle lines were drawn, not in contracts or patents, but in belief and endurance. Phoenix Innovations had no illusions of an easy road, but the fire was lit and it was spreading. The shadows quickly turned into real blows. Within 2 weeks, Phoenix Innovations found 3 key suppliers suddenly backing out of agreements. Emails arrived late at night, polite, apologetic, but firm. Unforeseen circumstances, they all claimed. Daniel read between the lines. Ethan's reach was long, and his threats carried weight. Miguel slammed his fist on the workbench. "They had contracts with us. This is pure intimidation." Laura scanned her laptop, lips tight. "And it doesn't stop there. Look, our landlord just doubled the rent for the warehouse.
He's tied to SolarWave's board. A heavy silence filled the room. Their small victories now felt fragile under the weight of an industry giant's tactics. But Daniel didn't waver. He looked at the team and said quietly, "If they're trying this hard to crush us, it means we're dangerous to them." That night, Phoenix's garage buzzed with renewed determination. Instead of despair, the team began mapping new strategies. Miguel proposed designing modular systems that could be sourced from multiple suppliers. Laura suggested building direct relationships with local businesses who had less to lose from SolarWave's threats. Meanwhile, Ethan's office glittered with confidence. Reports showed Phoenix Innovations' bleeding resources. "They won't last 6 months," Ethan told his board, raising a glass. Yet beneath his polished tone, he felt an itch of unease. Daniel was stubborn, and Ethan remembered that stubbornness well. Daniel, standing before a whiteboard filled with contingency plans, felt the opposite of defeat. Every strike from Ethan was teaching them to be stronger, leaner, more inventive. The crisis was becoming their crucible. "Let him come," Daniel said at last, marker in hand. "We'll be ready."
The following weeks tested Phoenix Innovations like never before. Orders delayed, shipments canceled, and whispers in the industry warning others to stay away from Daniel's team. Each new obstacle was a knife twist, but instead of breaking, the small company adapted. Laura built a spreadsheet that tracked every supplier, every possible backup, and even secondary logistics routes. Miguel worked nights to redesign prototypes so they could be built from multiple interchangeable parts. The garage became less a workplace and more a war room, its walls covered with notes, diagrams, and strategies born from necessity. Daniel often walked the floor, his presence quiet but steady. He spoke little, but every word counted. "We'll survive because we refuse to play by their rules." That single phrase became a rallying cry, scribbled in bold letters across the whiteboard. One evening, after another long day, Laura found Daniel outside the warehouse, staring at the city skyline. "Do you ever wish we had just taken Ethan's offer?" she asked softly. Daniel shook his head. "If we had, we'd just be shadows of ourselves. This way, no matter how hard it gets, we'll know we earned every step." Meanwhile, Ethan celebrated another quarterly success with his board. He smiled, but when one executive asked, "What about Phoenix Innovations?" his jaw tightened. "They're irrelevant," he replied sharply. Still, later that night, he lingered over an old photo of him and Daniel, back when they were boys, standing in front of a science fair project that won first place. He tossed it into a drawer, but the unease refused to leave. Back at Phoenix Innovations, the team unveiled a working prototype of their first fully modular solar hub, cheaper, faster to assemble, and nearly impossible to block with supplier manipulation. For the first time since Ethan's attacks began, they didn't just defend, they struck back. Miguel held the glowing model in his hands and grinned. "This isn't just survival. This is revolution." Daniel's eyes burned with quiet fire. "Then let's show them what it looks like."
News of Phoenix Innovations' modular solar hub spread faster than Daniel anticipated. At first, it was whispers in niche forums and among small-scale contractors looking for affordable alternatives. Then, one regional newspaper ran a story calling it the future of decentralized energy. By the end of the week, 3 independent energy blogs had picked up the story, each praising Phoenix for its resilience and innovation during a hostile market. Laura noticed the spike in emails. "We're not just getting inquiries," she said one morning, scrolling through her laptop. "We've got municipalities asking for quotes. Small businesses want pilot programs. Even a school district wants to test this hub." Daniel leaned over her shoulder, scanning the list. A cautious smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. These aren't scraps. These are opportunities. McGill clapped his hands together. Then it's time to scale. We need production ready yesterday. The team pushed harder, the warehouse buzzing with renewed purpose. They began converting one corner of the space into a streamlined assembly line. Local welders, machinists, and electricians, many laid off from larger corporations collapsing under the economic crisis, found work at Phoenix, each hire adding strength to the small company's backbone. At night, Daniel couldn't ignore the thought that Phoenix was becoming something greater than a business. It was a statement, proof that integrity and persistence could stand against greed. Meanwhile, Ethan's empire began to show cracks. Supply issues he once dismissed grew into delays. Investors who once praised his dominance now whispered about overextension. At a private board meeting, Ethan slammed his fist against the table. "I want Phoenix innovations buried. If one school district installs their hub, others will follow. Stop them before they scale." But Ethan's words no longer carried the same weight. His directors exchanged uneasy glances, silently questioning whether his obsession with Daniel was clouding his judgment. Back at Phoenix, Laura posted the first finished modular hub on social media. The photo of the sleek, glowing unit, captioned, "Built in a garage, ready for the world," went viral. The next morning, Daniel woke to hundreds of new messages and one phone call from a journalist asking if Phoenix Innovations would be open to a feature interview. For the first time, it felt like the tide was turning.
The interview request wasn't just another article. It was from National Business Weekly, a magazine known for spotlighting rising companies that disrupted entire industries. Daniel hesitated before answering the journalist's call, but Laura urged him on. "This is it, Daniel. The story of Phoenix deserves to be told." 2 weeks later, the feature hit newsstands. The headline read, "From Betrayal to Breakthrough: How Phoenix Innovations is Redefining Clean Energy." The article painted Daniel as a visionary leader, someone who refused to surrender even when the odds were stacked against him. More importantly, it positioned Phoenix as not just another startup, but as a potential market shaper. The response was electric. Calls poured in from city councils, entrepreneurs, and even overseas distributors. The team expanded production, renting an additional warehouse to keep up with demand. Miguel managed the growing workforce, while Laura coordinated a flood of partnership offers. Daniel, for the first time, allowed himself to dream beyond survival. Phoenix could truly compete with giants. But success brought attention from old rivals. Ethan read the article in his penthouse office, his jaw tightening with every paragraph. The photo of Daniel and his team standing proudly in front of their modular hub stung like salt in a wound. For years, Ethan had seen Daniel as the weaker partner, the dreamer who lacked ruthlessness. Yet here he was, building something powerful without him. "Phoenix Innovations is smoke and mirrors," Ethan barked at his board. "Their tech isn't scalable, their leadership is untested. We double down on our market share, cut costs, and drown them in contracts." But even as he spoke, the unease in the room was palpable. His directors no longer nodded with confidence. They shifted uncomfortably, as though sensing that Ethan was fighting shadows. Back at Phoenix, Daniel gathered his team in the cramped office. "We're not just a startup anymore," he said, his voice steady. "We're shaping how communities think about energy independence. That comes with responsibility. We can't just build, we have to lead." Laura raised her coffee cup to Phoenix, rising higher. The room erupted in cheers, but Daniel's gaze lingered on the glowing hub by the window. It wasn't just a product anymore. It was the weapon that would eventually bring him face to face with Ethan again.
This was the first part of their story. The next and final part follows this video on Stories by Peter Hub channel. Thank you for staying with us.